Hey, what's going on? Happy Thanksgiving. I hope you're having a great start to the holiday season. And what better thing to do when it's Thanksgiving, you have some time off, and you're quarantined. What better thing to do than to have a drink with your buddy Larry and write a little bit of code. I'm going to have a bit of Woodford Reserve today. And we are going to hang out and backtest some trading strategies. So let's talk about this. So during this tutorial series, we have been discussing this opening range breakout strategy. I know you're probably tired of it, right? We've been talking for like 20 videos now, and I keep saying opening range breakout, whatever. But yeah, we got to keep going with this because I want to actually test this strategy, right? Because how did I actually choose this as the example that we're going to talk about? Well, some guy sent me a link on Twitter and asked if I would talk about it. That was my entire decision-making process, and he sent me this link to this warrior trading site, right? And this warrior trading site says it works, right? But I don't know this warrior trading guy. Some people question whether he's legit or not. Maybe he's great. I don't know. I'm not making any judgments. But you'll find all of these strategies online. For instance, if you type, make $100 a day from trading, right? You'll see this guy talking about TTM squeeze. You'll see this zip trader guy talking about, you know, candlesticks and RSI and stuff like that. You'll find there's this 3-bar play guy in here. And they might all be great. You know, I haven't validated all of their claims. They might make tons of money from trading. However, how do you know whether to believe any of these people, right? If they claim these indicators work or these candlestick patterns work, if I say, you know, this opening range breakout strategy is what you should use, how do you actually test that out and see if there's even any truth behind that, right? Because it's easy for a video to cherry pick individual charts and individual stocks and show when a particular trading strategy would have worked and illustrate it, and you see the picture of the chart, you see the buy and the sell, and you go, wow, that made me a lot of money. I should be doing that. But how do you know if that really worked over time? A lot of people will show just the examples that worked, and they don't talk about when it didn't work. They don't talk about when they would have actually taken their stop loss. They talk about what you could have done, like, oh, you could have sold here, bought here, blah, blah, blah. Make it look really easy, right? So how do you validate that what any of these people are saying is true? How do you validate if anything I'm saying is true? How do you validate any of your ideas to see if there's any truth behind them and if these strategies would actually work over the long term, at least in the past? Well, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to use Backtrader to write a backtesting program that's going to take our historical data from the database that we downloaded in the last video. We can replay that data minute by minute for the entire year for every single stock in the NASDAQ 100. And our Backtrader program will apply a strategy to that feed of data. So as the minute data is being replayed minute by minute, we'll be executing the opening range breakout algorithm against that minute bar data. And Cerebro, which is the control center of a Backtrader application, is going to be updating a broker object and updating the cache, executing orders, and keeping track of profit and loss. And we'll be able to see the outcome of trading the strategy on any given day over the past year for any stock in the NASDAQ 100. And following this video, I'm going to show you how to optimize that strategy so that we can try out different parameters. So we can see, should we have used the 15-minute opening range, the 30-minute opening range, the 1-hour opening range? Should we have used an ATR stop loss, a 2 times ATR stop loss, or just 2 times the opening range? We could adjust any of the parameters in our program and see if we could optimize it a little more while being careful not to over-optimize or overfit our algorithm. So let's go ahead and get started talking about the code. And I'm going to approach this one a little bit differently in that I'm going to show you some of the written code and mark it up with the iPad and try to walk you through it first, and then we'll write the code from scratch real quick. So I want to give you an overview of how this works, and then we'll dive into the details and write it from scratch. So let's go ahead and get started with coding this strategy. All right, check it out. So I opened up some of my code. This is a screenshot of my code so that I can draw on it. So I'm trying out the iPad for this particular video. So this is some of the code for the strategy backtest. And what you see here, right here, is the main program. And so you have this if name equals main. It's the beginning of the program. And the first thing we do is connect to the Sqlite database using sqlite3.connect. And we're going to import our config at the top of the script. So we're just going to connect to our appdb file that we've been using throughout the tutorial series, and we're going to do a select query, right? And what that select query is going to do is select all the stock IDs that we have in our database. And so in the last video, we took a snapshot of all of the minute data for every single stock. And so we have a bunch of stock IDs in here. And those stock IDs all correspond to the stock IDs in the NASDAQ 100. So we have our stock table. Each of those has a primary key, and that refers to a unique stock. And so we're just getting a list of all the stocks we're going to loop through, right? And so here you'll see that I'm looping through all the stocks. And so for each stock, I'm going to run the backtest. So if you haven't watched my videos on Backtrader before, there's a few parts to a Backtrader program. The first thing that every single Backtrader program needs is to instantiate this Cerebro object right here. And Cerebro, I think it means, or Cerebro, I believe, is in Spanish. I think it means brain. And so this is just the control center for the application. So what Cerebro has is a couple of options. So the first thing you have is a broker. So the Cerebro object has a broker object, and you can give your broker a certain amount of cash. So your brokerage could be, you know, Alpaca or Ameritrade or E-Trade or whatever, but it emulates a broker here. And so we're setting the initial amount of cash that we want to trade with. I think by default it's 10,000, but I find that a little low. So I like to start with 100,000. So just think about the size of the account that you're usually trading with, and you know, the amount of cash that you want to initialize your brokerage with and test this out with. So I like 100,000. I think 10,000 is a little bit low. The next thing we do here, now this is optional, this add sizer. So that what add sizer does is it lets you specify the amount you're going to purchase on any given buy. So if you don't have a sizer here, when you execute a buy order with this broker, it'll just buy one share and sell one share. But if I add a sizer here, I can give it a certain percent or a certain amount of cash that I want to use when I make a trade. So I can say buy 100 shares. So I can use a fixed stake, like buy 100 shares, or I can say, you know, buy $10,000 worth, or I can say buy a percent worth. And so what this does is if I have $100,000 in my account, then this would use $95,000, right? And whenever I execute a trade. And as my account grew, if I grew it to 200,000, then this percentage would obviously go up. So 95% of 200,000 would be 190,000. So this would keep increasing the size. So basically, I'm essentially going all in on this strategy to see how it performs with different stocks, right? So I'm going almost all in, but if you put 100%, you run into some problems of running out of cash. So you don't want to get too close to using 100% of your balance. So that's why I'm using 95%, okay? So the first thing you need is to instantiate Cerebro, and then you need to add some cash to your broker. And optionally, you can add a sizer here to determine how much capital you want to use on any given trade, okay? The next thing you need to do with Backtrader is to provide a data feed. Now, in the videos I've done in the past, I've used a CSV file as the data feed. You can also use a pandas data frame as a data feed, but what I haven't actually seen a lot of people do is using a database. It's used a database as the data feed, and so that's what I'm doing here. And so I looked into how to do that. And since there's a way to provide a pandas data feed, so Backtrader pandas data, so backtrader.feeds.pandas data will accept a pandas data frame. And so what I did was use this feature of pandas, this method called read SQL. And what that does is it lets pandas execute a SQL query. So this is my SQL query. And you just give it your database connection, which I established up here, right? So that's my database connection reference. I'm going to execute this SQL query here. And then we just need to give it some parameters. And so this SQL query, as you can see, I'm selecting all the minute bars from stock price minute. So I'm selecting date time, open, high, low, close, and volume. where stock ID equals stock ID. So this is a placeholder, and then these params, you pass the params that go into the placeholder, right? So there's a variable that's actually going into this stock ID. And so up here, right, we're looping through each stock, and so this will pass it stock ID number 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so this query here, if it was on, you know, the first iteration of this loop, it might be on Apple. The second iteration, it might be on AMD, and so forth. So this is just taking, running a query that selects all of the minute bars for one symbol between a certain time period. And so I'm just getting the minute bars when the market is open in this case. So the opening range breakout strategy is not trading pre-market or after-market. So I'm filtering it down to the hours of 9:30 till 4 p.m. here. And so if you remember in the last video, we're storing all of our minute bar data in New York time, so Eastern time. And so I'm selecting all the opening bars, okay? Well, all the bars while the market is open. Now, someone on the message board, I think, asked about trading pre-market. And so if you want to trade pre-market, we also have that pre-market data in our database if you want to use that, right? So we're selecting all the minute bars for a given day, and we're using these parameters here. And there's a couple of extra options here where we parse the date and time and specify the index of the data frame is the date time, right? And so after we run this, we'll just have a big pandas data frame as usual that's indexed by the date time, and we have all the price data, okay? So then we add this data frame as a data feed to Backtrader, right? So you instantiate the main part of the program, Cerebro, give it some cache, you give it a feed of data, and then you need to apply a strategy to that data, okay? So we're gonna add the data feed, and then we're going to add a strategy. And this opening range breakout is the name of the strategy class that we're going to run. And so every Backtrader strategy needs to extend a base strategy class. So it uses object-oriented programming here. So far, we've just written some scripts that are just run in order. They're very procedural, but Backtrader uses an object-oriented approach here, which allows you to inherit some methods and override some methods to implement your strategy. And so we're going to talk about how to do that. And so once we have a data feed and a strategy to apply to that data, we do Cerebro run, and that just runs through the strategy. And by running a strategy, I mean it's going to replay the minutes minute by minute and apply that strategy class to that minute bar data. And then I have this commented out right now, but you can plot the results to show on a chart. It will indicate visually when buys and sells occurred, and it'll show your account balance growing. So you can see a visual indication of your trading strategy in action, right? And so that's very useful as well, and I'll show that shortly. And I also have this part commented out, and this is the optimized strategy function. So after we run it for just a 15-minute strategy by default, or a 15-minute opening range by default, what we can do is give it some parameters and say optimize and show me the results for if I used 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and 60 minutes as my opening range. Okay, so that's the main part of the program. And then next, I'm going to talk quickly about the core strategy class here, right? And so the other part of the program here is the strategy class. So this is a class, right? And you just give it a name, opening range breakout, and it extends backtrader.strategy. So every strategy needs to extend this backtrader.strategy class, and that provides the base functionality of the object, okay? And we're giving it some parameters by default. So we're giving it some default parameters where the number of opening bars is 15. So we're doing an opening range of 15 minutes. However, with that optimized strategy, we can specify to try different values for opening bars and show the results for each one, okay? But by default, when we first run it, we're just gonna try out 15 minutes before we optimize it, okay? When we instantiate the strategy class, we're gonna initialize some values. So that's our init function. And initially, the opening range is 0, the opening high is 0, the opening range is 0. We haven't bought anything today. There's no orders yet. So we're just initializing it with nothing. And then we have a basic logging utility function. And we can just call this function log anytime we want to print some output. And it'll just print a timestamp and whatever text that we pass. So we can pass it some text here. And then this is going to show on the screen bought at 12:22, sold at 12:31, and so forth. So it's just a way to log what's happening throughout the day in the program. And then we also have this notify order function. So this is another function that's part of a Backtrader strategy. And what that does is just a check on the order status. So when you execute an order to buy or sell, that isn't filled necessarily immediately, right? Sometimes the order is accepted, but it hasn't been filled, right? And so this function lets us check on the status of an order. And so you can see if the order status is submitted or accepted, right? This doesn't really do anything. But if we actually complete and fill an order, right? If order is completed, then we log the order details. So this is when I use the log function. So self.log, and it's calling this log function, right? And so we're just going to show the order details. So we're going to show the price, the fill price, like where the order was executed. We're going to show how much it cost and show the commission. And since we're using Alpaca here, there's no commission, and I haven't configured the slippage yet either, okay? So this is just logging the price we got and when the order got filled. And then if we go over the amount of cash we have, we could have an error like order canceled, or we went over our account balance, right? And then once we've successfully processed our order, we can reset self.order to none, okay? So this is mostly utility functions and keeping track of the order status. The bulk of the trading strategy is actually implemented in this next function, okay? And I'm going to pull that up. All right, this is the most important, I would say this is the most important function to understand in the program, because this is where we're actually implementing the algorithm itself. And so the next function is called minute by minute. So this next function is called for every single minute of data. So we have a data feed, and then this self.data actually contains the minute bar data, okay? So you see how there's self.data.high and self.data.low here. A feed of data looks like a line here. And so the self.data, the 0th index is the current bar. So that would be the current bar. And then Backtrader uses this negative indexing where I can look at the previous bar, okay? And so the way this works is, since we're replaying all the minute data in order, it starts at 9:30. So the market opens, the first minute bar is 9:30, so the index of that bar will be 0. So if we do self.data.low 0, that'll access the current bar, right? So this next function runs all the way through for the first minute of the day. Then at 9:31, it runs again, and then 9:30 is the previous minute bar. So then the 0th index is 9:31, and then the negative first index is 9:30. And so the tape kind of, you got to think of the tape playing minute by minute in order, and the head or beginning of the tape, is the current minute, and then you can look back at previous minutes. And so you can see what I'm doing here is I'm storing a reference to the current bar and the previous bar by accessing the 0th date time and the negative first date time, okay? And then so what I'm doing is for each bar I'm going through, since we're processing multiple dates, I reset the opening range high and low every single day. So if the current bar's date time is not equal to the previous bar's date, if the current bar's date is not equal to the previous bar's date, then I reset the date and we're starting over. I reset the opening range high and low, okay? And so what we do, right, remember how opening range breakout works, is the start time is 9:30, right? And then to get the end time of the opening range, I just add the number of opening bars. So since by default this number is 15, we're adding 15 minutes to 9:30. So I have an opening range start time of 9:30 and an opening range end time of 9:45, okay? And so there's two conditions to keep track of. Are we inside of the opening range currently, inside of that time range, or have we passed that opening time range? So at the beginning, if we're in the opening time range, that'd be 9:30, 9:31, 9:32, 9:33, 9:34, all the way to 9:45, right? If we've replayed all the bars and we're in the first 15 minutes here, then we just keep track of the maximum high and the maximum low, or the minimum low that's occurred so far. So if we're in the opening range, if at 9:31 the high is higher than it was at 9:30, then we're going to point opening range high to the new bar, and then we're just going to keep track of the high minute by minute and keep updating the opening range high keep updating the opening range low. And to get the opening range value, we just subtract the high minus the low, okay? And so if it was, Apple stock goes from 120 to 125 over the course of that range, that first 15 minutes, then the opening range would be 5, and the opening range high would be 125, and the opening range low would be 120, okay? Okay, and so this part, we're processing the first 15 minutes, okay? And then this else here, we're going through all the time for the rest of the day. And so there's a few conditions here. We'll say if there's already an order in, then return, do nothing, okay? And then here's our buy trigger here. See our self.buy. So if the close of the current minute, so that's the current minute, is greater than the opening range high, and we're not in the position already, and we have not bought yet today, we're only trading once a day, then we're going to do self.buy, and we're going to store the result of that in self.order, and then we set self.bought today equal to true. Okay, so that's our buy trigger if we closed above the opening range high. Okay, and then once we're in the position, then we need to know when to exit the position. So this is our entry. When do we exit? A couple places. The first place we can exit is if we can set a target. So we might want to set a target to the opening range high plus 1 times the opening range. And so if we close above the opening range high, 125, plus the opening range, which was 5 in my example, so that means if Apple went to 130, then we could close the position. Okay, so that's closing the position profitably. The other way we can exit is exiting at a loss. So this is our stop loss. So here I'm saying if we're in the position, if self.position, and we close less than, and then in this case I'm doing the opening range high minus the opening range. So 125 minus 5. So if we drop back down to 120, then exit out of the position. And there's a lot of different ways to set this. That's just one example that I chose. So if it goes up $5, we sell. If it goes down $5, then we sell. Okay, so we could do 2 times. We can have the profit at 2 times the loss and so forth, or use the ATR, a bunch of other strategies. But so we have a way to enter the position, and we have a way to exit the position at a profit, and a way to exit the position at a stop loss, right? And the other thing that can happen is we don't hit our profit target or hit our stop loss. In this case, I have this running out of time liquidating position, and this happens at time 3:45. So if the current bar's time is greater than 3:45 p.m., market's about to close, I'm just going to liquidate the position because it was specified that we're doing a day trade and we don't want to hold this overnight. And so that's our processing. We're running this entire next function for each and every minute, and we're looking at the current minute and any previous minutes and making all the adjustments and reacting to that minute tape being played by Backtrader, right? And then the final thing we have here is the stop function, and this is called at the end of the strategy running all the way through. And you see this logs out the number of bars, and then it writes the final value. So I'm writing out the ending value here, and so you can see finally how much profit we made or how much money we lost. And then I added this extra log here just to note stocks that performed exceptionally well, and I'm defining that as 30%, a 30% gain or loss. So if we finish this $100,000 account for the year above 130,000, then I'm just logging the words big winner. And if we went down $30,000, I'm writing major loser. And then we're going to look through our logs and see which stocks perform the best using this strategy. So hopefully that made sense. I know I drew a lot on this particular chart here, but I'm going to walk through it step by step. But hopefully, since I explained it up front here, I can write the code a little bit faster and move quicker when we write the program. So let's go ahead and open up Visual Studio Code and write this and run it and print out the output and see what happens. All right, let's do this. I'm in Visual Studio Code. I am going to create a new file. I'm going to call it backtest.py. There it is. And to make this easier on everyone, I posted this code in GitHub under Hacking the Markets, full stack trading app, if you want to follow along. And also help me code it quicker because I don't feel like typing this whole thing out right now, to be honest. And so I'm going to do raw here, and I'm going to paste this in. And And what I'm going to do is comment a lot of it out, and that way I can talk about it as we build this program up. And so what I'll do here is go ahead and leave this class mostly empty. So I'm going to comment out this whole thing. So we just have class opening range breakout, and I'll just do pass here. Okay, I'll leave my imports in place, and then my main program here, I'll basically comment everything out and show you what's going on. Okay, so we'll run this in order. All right, so let's look at this. So if name equals main, we have that here. Then we're going to connect to our Sqlite database. At the top here, we're importing our config, and our config has the name of our database file. So we're using a config.db file. We're creating our row factory here, which lets us access the rows that are returned from our query. Let's just access them more like an object or dictionary, right? And then we're creating a new cursor so that we can run a query. And I'm just going to select the distinct stock IDs from my stock price minute table. And that way I can get all of the stocks that I populated in there. Remember, I'm not selecting from the stock table in this case, because the stock table has every single stock ID in it, and I just want to run the ones for the NASDAQ 100 that I populated in stock price minute. So those are the only ones we have minute bar data for as of the last video. So I'm going to fetch all those stocks, and then I'm just going to print which stock I'm on. So we're looping through each of the stocks. So I'm going to run this, and we should see a bunch of stock IDs get printed to the screen. Okay. So that's going to run. You see that was a bit slow because we have a lot of data. I can add an index to make that run a little faster, and so I'll do that in a minute. So you see how it says testing 142, 147, and so forth. So we have a bunch of stock IDs. And so what we're going to do is run our backtest on every one of these stock IDs. So when we're testing at the beginning, it's going to be like testing 142, which corresponds to some stock in our database. And then we're going to instantiate Backtrader. So this is our Cerebro object, and we're going to give it a certain amount of cache, right? And then we're going to run our Cerebro here, okay? So if I run this, it's going to run, and you see nothing happened, right? Because we instantiated it, but we didn't give it any data, we didn't give it any strategy or anything, okay? So I'm going to leave the sizer out for now, and then I'm going to actually run this query for our data frame. So what I'll do now, instead of running this for all 100 stocks at first, I'm just going to run it for the first one. So I'm going to say, I'm going to remove this line shortly, but I'm going to say stocks equals stocks 0, and make that a list. And so basically this will just be a list of 1, and that 1 will be just the very first stock in the list. And so I'm going to loop through that list of 1. I'm going to instantiate Cerebro. I'm going to fetch all of the minute data. So I'm going to let this run, and I'm going to print the data frame and make sure that works. Okay, so I'm going to print the data frame. So this should be all of the minute bar data for a single stock, stock ID 142. So there it is. And so you see my query ran, and I have, this starts at January 6th, which is the first week we stored minute data for. So this is data for the entire year. So January, 9:30 a.m., and you can see it goes all the way down till November 20th at the end of the day. So we have tons of minute data here, and we have 87,360 records just for that one stock. So that's looking pretty good. Okay, so now that we have that, I can just remove that part where I'm printing it. I'm going to create a new pandas data feed and give it the name. And so we're going to pass it our data frame. We're going to add the data feed to Cerebro, and then we're going to add a strategy to Cerebro, just like that. And then we're going to run our strategy again. Okay. And that's going to run, but it's not really going to do much because our strategy doesn't have anything really in it, right? So I'm letting that run. And nothing happened, right? So now we need to actually uncomment some of this stuff out, right? So I'm going to leave these params in here. So this is some default parameters that are in a dictionary here. And we're using num opening bars of 15. We're going to initialize the class. And so when we run the strategy, initially the opening range high and low are 0. The opening range is 0. We haven't bought anything. There's no orders. We'll put back the log function, which we've already talked about. And we'll put back this notify order function. So this part is straight out of the Backtrader documentation, this notify order part. So if you need more details on that, go to the documentation and just go to the quick start guide here. And if you look at notify order, right, this code I wrote here is straight out of there. So it's just checking on the status of an order and printing it out. This and the log function as well come out of the documentation. Okay, so there's that. And so the important part here is to understand this next function. And so I'm going to uncomment just one piece of this. Okay, and let's see what next looks like each time. So I'm going to comment that out, and I'm just going to print self.data. Let's do self.data.open 0. Okay, so if I print that and run this, this is going to play an entire line of data. So this next function executes for every single data point in the data feed. So you see that? It's just streaming opening data. And so you can see how we're basically just processing each bar minute by minute in this function, right? So that's the open. But if we want to access the previous minute, I can do self.data.open -1, and that'll show me the current bar and the previous bar. If we want to look 15 minutes back, we could do -15, for instance, right? So we just use negative indexing to look back in time, okay, at the previous bar for that, and so forth. And to show you that a little bit better, let's go ahead and show the date times, right? So here, I'm storing the current bar's date time and the previous bar's date time. So if I print those, current bar date time, and I print the previous bar's date time, you'll see how this is executing minute by minute, right? And this num to date function is a date conversion function that's built into Backtrader. When it gets this date time, it's actually in a certain format that Backtrader uses. So this num to date converts it to the type of date you'd expect, right? So you see how this is playing through minute by minute, and I'm showing the current bar in the previous minute, the current minute, the previous minute. And so we're iterating over this data feed. So we're playing the entire data feed minute by minute, but we can access the previous minute by using the index, okay? So here, what we're doing is resetting the opening range low and high. At the very beginning, we're on like January 6th, right? And so the initial opening range low and high is just whatever it is, the first minute of the day, and we haven't bought anything, so bought today is false. And then once we roll to January 7th, right, we need to reset it, and so the new opening range high and close, which would be whatever the first minute bar of that day is, right? So we're running through this day by day, minute by minute. We're reinitializing it, resetting everything, right? We're calculating the opening range start time, which is a time object. So we're using this time 9:30, and we're going to use this time delta to add minutes. And so since we're using 15 minutes as our default opening bars, we're going to add 15 minutes to 9:30 and then convert that to a time. And so we'll have 9:30 and 9:45 here. And then here we do our calculations. And so we're going to say if the current bar's date time, we're storing the current bar's date time. If that's between the opening range start time, 9:30, and 9:45, then we can go ahead and update our opening range high and low. So the first 15 minutes, we're just establishing this opening range high and low. If the high gets larger and larger, we'll keep storing that result in opening range high, and we'll keep track of the opening range low while we're in this range until finally we're outside of the first 15 minutes, and then we have a final value for our opening range. Okay. So else, this means it's after 9:45, then we're going to run all this other code. Okay. And then as we discussed in the drawing, and I think the drawing actually covered this pretty well. That's why I'm just kind of racing through this, because I already drew on the diagram and talked about what this is doing. But the main parts are that we have an entry and exit defined. And so our entry is if we close above the opening range high and we're not in the position we haven't bought yet, then we can do self.buy and set bought today to true. And then we have a few places we exit. First, we can exit for a profit if the close of the current bar is greater than the opening range high plus the opening range. Then we can close it, and we discussed that throughout this entire series, so I don't want to go over that again. We can also close at a loss, so we can get stopped out by saying if we're in the position and the close is less than the opening range high minus the opening range or whatever condition you use, we'll do that. And then we can also liquidate at the end of the day. And then finally, we can print out the results when this stop function is called. So these functions are called automatically by Backtrader. So we don't, you notice we're not calling next. When a Backtrader strategy runs, it just runs next over and over again for the length of the data feed. And then once it's done processing data, it calls the stop method. So these events are just built into the class. And so when it's done, we can print the ending value of the account with self.broker.getValue. Cool. So yeah, that's pretty much the whole program. Actually, this took me a long time to write. So I saved you some frustration of getting through this, because working through all these timestamps and addition and getting this right actually took a long time. But presenting it, it looks very easy here, but it's good. I want you should take this code and like wrestle with it and just start a new strategy from scratch and see if you can do it. So I'm going to run this, and this is just going to run for one stock. We'll see how this works. So see, it says testing 142, and then this should call our log function, right? And you see how it says buy, sell, executed. And so you can see this strategy actually running in order, and that's pretty cool, right? So if I go back, you can see what happened at the beginning. So you can see it ran for January 6th, and you can see at 9:48, it must have broke out of the opening range. So it executed a buy, never reached the target for that day, so it liquidated position at the end of the day. And then the sell executed when we liquidated. And then January 7th, it got right back up and started over. It bought, and then it sold at a profit, which is great. January 8th, it bought, but liquidated, ran out of time. January 9th, bought and sold at a loss, right? And so it just goes through day by day, and you see what the results would have been from the trading strategy that you coded, and it shows you, the price you paid, what it costs, and you can even print out the brokerage balance as you go. And you see, I actually, the cost is only the cost of one share, and that's because I didn't use the sizer. And let's put this sizer back in, because we want to buy more than one share, right? Otherwise, we're just buying $50 and selling it, $60 and selling it, right? So let's do this $100,000 number and run this one more time to make it a little more interesting. So I'm going to run this, and this is just running for one stock, for stock 142. Okay, so it's running through line by line, and now you see the cost is like $99,000 and things like that. And we're going to see what happened at the end. And sure enough, at the very end, this is when the stop function executes. And you see, for this particular stock at least, opening range breakout was not a successful strategy. So the ending value of that account was 96,663. So lost money. Unfortunate. So it didn't work there. So did it work for any of the stocks? Let's check that out. So instead of doing stock 0, I'm going to run this in order, and I'm going to let it run through for every single stock we have. So I'm going to use this little arrow to log the output to a file, and then we'll look at the file. So I'm going to output this to a text file. So output.txt, and I'm going to let this finish, and this is going to actually take a while to run because it's going to play through all the days for all stocks that we had in our database. So I'm going to let that run. I'm going to stop the video and then show you what the results look like. All right, so I have the output file loaded, and it has tons of data now. So this is what it looks like when it has when it runs through for every single stock. So you see there's many lines here corresponding to every single day. And so if you'll remember, in our backtest script here, we printed big winner and big loser, right? So let's see if there's any big winners out of this, and maybe this will give us an idea of the type of stocks this worked well for. So if I type winner here, you'll see there was a stock that was traded where the account balance finished at 132,000. And let's see what that stock was. If I scroll up a little bit, we should be able to find it. So this was stock 442. Okay, so what is that? If I look through, okay, yeah, 442 is actually AMD. Worked really well with this strategy. And just to make sure that our script actually works, let's look at an example here that was profitable. So AMD, let's look at January 9th here. Yeah, let's see January 9th, it bought at right after the opening range and sold. So if I go back to our app or trading view and then type AMD, and then let's look at the chart for, what is that, January 9th, right? So I'm going to go back on the 15-minute chart. We can go back to January 9th, and let's see what that looks like. So if I zoom in here to January 9th, all right, so that looks like it makes sense. So you see this green bar here, that's the first 15-minute bar. And if I look at the open, high, low, and close, so the high is 49.36 and the low is 48.84. And so our program here says it executed a buy at 49.37 at 9:46, right? So that was right at the beginning of this bar, basically. So you see how it closed outside of that opening range, or it closed outside of that opening range. So we got this price up here. We bought, and then we took a profit up here. And so we sold at 10.18 for 49.93. So it didn't take very long, and then we just sold it right here at 49.93. So that was a great quick entry, quick exit. Fell back, but we're already out of the trade. So that looks like it worked, actually. So that looks pretty good. And we could verify more if we wanted to. But yeah, you can see how AMD establishes the opening range, breaks out real quick. And so yeah, it's a nice volatile stock that we can trade. And it looks like it worked pretty well with the opening range breakout because we got a 30% profit. And you can compare that to buy and hold and so forth if you would like. The stock performed very well on the year, as you know now, right? You know, I think AMD at the beginning of the year was like 30 and probably has nearly tripled, right? Nearly went to 100. So didn't beat buy and hold, right? But, you know, it performed pretty well and managed risk pretty well. Like, we didn't take any big drawdowns. So if AMD, if you would have bought it at the beginning of the year, I think you had to watch it fall up till March 20th. It fell with everything else. So it might have fell from like, we can look, obviously. So yeah, you can see AMD, you would have, if you had it, you'd watch it go from 52 down to 37. So pretty big drawdowns there. So that's kind of scary. So one nice thing about this is you get stopped out pretty quickly and protect your capital. So that's one benefit here. So yeah, so you can see it worked out pretty well there. So let's see if there are some other big winners that performed even better. We can look through our list. And I got one here, big winner, finished at 164,000. So if I scroll back up, you can see what that is. So that is 4692. And if I go to my database, that is Marriott, apparently was one of the best performers with this strategy. So if we look at Marriott stock, you can see it was probably very volatile this year. And so if I look at Marriott for the year, apparently this performed very well with the opening range breakout. And why is that? Let's look at some of the example trades that executed. So if we look here, you'll see, where does the account balance really start growing? I'm going to guess that volatility in March led to some big gains. Yeah, look at that. So March 19th, you see where we were in some trades here where the account balance quickly went up. So if you look on March 20th, March 23rd, March 24th, this account rapidly grew. And so that was around this bottom here. So those ranges were probably huge, I'm guessing. So if we look at March 23rd, if we look at the opening range, like the 15 minutes on those days, they're probably really crazy. So I'm going to zoom in. Yeah, look at it. This capitulation down here, and so that those huge candlesticks there. So you can see this opening range here, and then breaking out of that and having a huge move here from 60 to 71 in the same hour, right? Same thing. There's this range here where it sold off and then it spiked big. So yeah, there was a lot of these huge moves like this and a lot of gaps. There's another move down, way back up. So it's very, very volatile stock here. So you can look through this list. I'm not going to analyze all of them, but You can see, how well it worked, which stocks it worked on and which it didn't. See if you can find any common patterns there if you're interested in using the strategy. The other thing I haven't done is we also ran this as a short strategy, so shorting a breakdown of the opening range, so we could also run the strategy that way as well. So I ran this as a long only strategy for every stock here. And we can also filter down the list by some of the other indicators. Maybe we only want to trade stocks above the 200-day moving average or 20-day moving average or whatever we want to do there. And so that's pretty good. So we have an example of running a trading strategy all the way through and back testing it minute by minute. And the other thing I wanted to do, so I wanted to show you how this works with this optimize strategy, and I also wanted to show plotting. So here's what we can do. So see how we have this Cerebro run? There's also a Cerebro plot here, and I'm just going to run this for one stock because I can't plot all of them. So I'm going to go back to where I did, so stocks equals, and then I'm just going to hard code a value, stock ID, and let's just do that AMD stock again. So I think that was 442. And let me see if I can just run this and get the plot. All right, I'm going to run the program real quick just for a single stock. So this is AMD, and I'm going to see if we can show all the trades and plot it and see if we can get a visualization of what this backtest looks like. All right, so it's taken a second to run through, and I haven't added that index yet, so I need to do that. So it's running through, showing all the trades, and then we should get a plot come up after it gets to the end here. All right, so we printed big winner, and you see it pulled up a plot here. Yeah, it's kind of messy. There's a lot of data here. Looks a little bit better whenever it shows day by day. But you can see Backtrader here plotting all the different trades. And we can't really zoom in and see it very well, but you see the green arrows here are when the buy was made. The red arrows are when we exit the trade. And so there's a trade made every single day with this strategy, so it's a pretty noisy. But you can see at the top here, you can see the cash balance starting at 100,000, and you can see how with AMD stock at least, how the account balance grew over the course of the year. So it started 100,000 on this side, and you see this little number on the right is 132,000, showing the balance going up and down. And then this shows our trades, and so all the blue dots here are the profitable trades, and the red dots down here are the negative trades. And you see this is a profit of 3,000 up here, and that's a loss of 3,000. And so you can see the profitable trades. First of all, there's more of them, and then also the profits look like they're a little bit higher than the losses. So looks pretty good, and you can see the trades, the entry and exits plotted on top of the chart for AMD, and you see how AMD actually performed really well this year, so buying and holding would have worked pretty well, but also it was pretty brutal to live through this drawdown right here. So so that's AMD, and that's how you visualize and plot a chart in Backtrader. And then also the final thing I'm going to do is show you this optimized strategy, and you cannot run a plot when you do this. And so if you call Cerebro opt strategy, you give it a strategy class, and then I'm going to comment out the add strategy. So we're not going to add a strategy, we're going to optimize the strategy. We give it the name of the class, and then we give it different parameters for num opening bars. So I'm going to let it run for 15, 30, and 60 and see which one performed the best. So I'm going to run it, and I'm going to let this run for AMD only and see which parameter worked the best. Okay, so it says testing 442, and it's going to run through the day for all three different permutations of the parameters here. So now that it's finished, you see at the end it printed the results. So opening bars for 15 minutes as a parameter, the ending value is 132,000. 30 minutes as the opening range, it was 130,000, and for 60 minutes it was 117,000. So you can see in this particular case, looks like it was better to use the 15 minutes as your opening range, and that made the strategy perform the best. And we could try to optimize this even further by like passing all the parameters like 15 minutes, 16 minutes, 17 minutes, 18 minutes, 19 minutes, or trying every single moving average and things like that, like the 197-day moving average and such, to try to fit the strategy, but that's considered over-optimizing. And so, sure, we could come up with a backtest that perfectly predicts and works for the past, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything about the future. So it's good to have, an actual theory behind why your idea or strategy actually works, and to test it with a few parameters like this, but not, you don't want to overdo it. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, we talked about how to take advantage of the minute data that we downloaded in the previous video. We wrote a backtest to test our opening range breakout strategy for all stocks in that list in the QQQ. And we talked about how to optimize the parameters, how to visualize the results, and how to see the outcome and test our ideas to see their profitability based on historical data. And we can continue to forward test our strategies just using paper trading, but you can see how this backtesting strategy makes it very easy to see how our performance would have been over the course of a year, rather than having to wake up every morning, see how our strategy did day by day. That's a very slow process. Backtesting lets us run our algorithm quickly over years and years of time and see the results. So hope you learned something. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next video. Thanks.